Welcome to D. Wayne Harbison's The 8-Inch Conundrum story. Our first episode is Welcome to the Hollow. If you like the story, please give it a like and a share. Also, leave a note in the comments below on where you are listening from and how you found my page. I'm always interested in people who enjoy my work. Feel free to comment on where you think the story is going and where you think it should go. Again, thank you. Now on to our story. Episode 1. Welcome to the Hollow. Brennan surfaced into awareness like a diver breaking through thick, resisting water. His senses emerged slowly, in fragments that didn't quite fit together. The first thing he noticed was the smell, clinical, recycled, and unnaturally clean, like a hospital trying too hard to pretend nothing ever died there. The air felt cool and dry as it filled his lungs, the faintest trace of ozone hanging beneath it, and something else, burnt plastic, maybe, or sterilization residue. He cracked open his eyes and blinked against the white light that poured in from above. It wasn't sunlight. It was too steady, too cold, a broad panel of illumination that lacked any warmth. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, easily 100 feet above him, maybe more. A moment passed before he realized he was lying on what looked like a wide, seamless surface of white material. It was cool and smooth under his fingertips, not quite metal, not quite ceramic. He sat up with a low grunt, his joints creaking from disuse, and that was when the world truly tilted. The table beneath him, white and flat and bordered by thin raised edges, extended outward in all directions, surrounded by sheer drops on every side. Around the perimeter of the surface stood transparent partitions like miniature walls, and beyond them rose strange columns of equipment. Medical arms, screen clusters, scanners, all arranged with crisp symmetry, but all far too massive. Machines loomed overhead like sculptures designed to study whales, not people. His pulse quickened. The bed wasn't a bed. The table wasn't a table. And the room was not made for anyone his size. He turned slowly, letting his eyes adjust. Several other shapes lay nearby, human outlines, unmoving at first. Just beyond a stack of towering instruments, Brennan spotted Celine, her arms curled loosely in front of her, blonde hair splayed like a halo. She was slender and elegant, with Nordic features and skin pale from too many hours under fluorescent lights. Cale was sprawled on his side, shirt rumpled and one leg twitching in a slow, unconscious rhythm. He was taller than the rest, with golden hair and sharp features, his frame long-limbed and lean, marked by wiry muscle. Tamsin lay perfectly still, her arms folded across her chest like someone intentionally conserving energy. Her raven-black hair was pulled back in a short braid, her face calm, but her build was lithe and runner-tight, framed by high cheekbones and a steel-set jaw. And Rowan sat propped up against a raised ridge, legs pulled in, his eyes open and tracking the walls with eerie stillness. He was the smallest, with copper-red hair falling in feathered strands around a narrow, freckled face, with green eyes that held far too much distance. A low-frequency hum filled the air, pulsing through the table itself. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was vibration, a deep mechanical thrum that pressed into Brennan's spine and stayed there, steady and unnerving. He swung his legs off the edge of the platform. His bare feet found the polished surface below, cool and faintly grippy, not slick like glass but just textured enough to hold his balance. The motion revealed something else. His center of gravity was off. He felt heavier than he remembered, denser, as though someone had packed lead into his frame. Yet he moved easily, his balance precise, controlled. Ahead, a shadow passed across one of the walls. It wasn't a wall, but a transparent panel, a viewing screen. No, not a screen, but glass. There was a viewer behind it, watching. He looked up. The glass stretched upward like the side of a skyscraper. Beyond it, faintly lit, floated strange angular shadows. Brennan narrowed his eyes. The reflections didn't move like people. They moved like devices, like mechanical arms, with mounted servos and hidden lenses. A long, delicate panel descended from the ceiling, its surface glowing faint blue. Symbols flowed across it in a fluid succession, representing pulse rate, hormone levels, and molecular signatures, as data streamed in real time from the surface of the platform. From the surface of their table. A containment lab. They were in a lab. And they were not full-size. The realization crashed into him with a full-body shudder. Not metaphorical, not a sci-fi dream. Not virtual. Real. Everything around him confirmed it. The air vents in the corners were each the size of a loading dock gate. The surgical arms overhead were the size of cranes. Even the stitches on his collar, those tiny double seams he'd never thought about, looked appropriately scaled. Brennan realized that his clothing hadn't become coarser, unlike normal shrinking. Of course it hadn't. He remembered the briefings. Objects that retain a biofield, like living beings and recently worn clothing, can be miniaturized and remain in stable stasis until deliberately reversed. Dead meat, disconnected tools, inanimate plastics, those shrink permanently. But living matter always returns, unless something interferes. They were supposed to return. Maximum safe exposure, 119 minutes and 54 seconds. It had been longer. A voice stirred to his right. Hoarse, annoyed, tinged with disbelief. "What the hell?" Cale said. Another groan, followed by movement from Celine. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her head turned slowly, and her eyes locked on Brennan. "Brennan, are you seeing this too?" He gave a slow nod, every muscle in his neck taut. "I think so," he said, "but I really wish I wasn't." Celine's eyelids twitched once, then fluttered open. The light above her was too sharp, sterile white with a faint blue undertone, and it sliced through the fog in her brain like a scalpel. Her body felt oddly light, as if someone had replaced her muscles with scaffolding. Every nerve was tingling faintly, not with pain, but with that fuzzy static that comes after a long hospital stay or being put under for too long. The air was crisp and filtered, carrying with it the faint antiseptic trace of overused disinfectant and ozone. A low, mechanical hum filled the space around her, constant and omnipresent, like a machine breathing in the walls. Her skin prickled with the cold, and when she shifted, her clothes whispered against the surface beneath her, cool, untextured, and unyielding. Not cloth. Not a bed. She blinked again. Slowly, the haze cleared. This wasn't a hospital room. She sat up abruptly, then steadied herself with one hand. A moment passed before her eyes locked on Brennan, already upright, standing at the platform's edge like a human wall between them and the unknown. From this angle, he looked like something out of a sculptor's dream, broad-shouldered, his ash-gold hair tousled, jaw tense, hands curled into fists at his sides. She had always known he carried the group's weight, but there was something different about him now. It wasn't just physical. It was the way he stood, eyes scanning the perimeter, taking in every detail with calm determination. He looked like he'd been ready for this, like he'd decided that nothing, giant lab equipment, towering machines, or whatever godless experiment they'd been dropped into, would touch the others as long as he stood. The scale hit her next. Everything around them was impossibly large. The lighting strips above their heads were the size of train station beams. The medical arms mounted to the walls were cranes, articulated and glinting under the light. What she had mistaken for small vents in the corners were easily large enough to drive a truck through. The bed she had been lying on was not a bed, but a table-sized surface embedded into a curving platform that was sterile, seamless, and manufactured for something clinical. And huge. She stared at her legs. They were her own. Her feet looked the same. Her clothes, a fitted exercise tee and black leggings, hung just as they had yesterday. That was the last day, wasn't it? Had it really been that short ago? Everything felt wrong. She reached into her waistband, pulling out the small device clipped at her side, her phone. Somehow, it was still intact. The screen flared to life with a soft blue glow, the touch interface oversized under her fingers. A timestamp flashed in the corner. Nearly 24 hours. Her breath caught. She glanced around. Cale slowly pushed himself upright, rubbing the back of his neck with a low grunt. Tamsin was stretching cautiously, flexing her hands and shoulders with a precise economy of motion. Both were alert now, scanning, calculating, even if they didn't speak. And Rowan. Rowan hadn't moved. He was already sitting cross-legged against the curve of the wall, a position too intentional to be recent. His copper-red hair framed a face that looked both exhausted and eerily serene. His eyes, vibrant green in the sterile light, didn't track her movement immediately. They were fixed on the display across the room, that hovering screen of translucent light showing biometric data none of them had authorized. Celine stared at him. He had definitely been awake longer than the rest of them. Maybe much longer. She wondered what he had seen and what he had already deduced. His face didn't hold fear. It held questions, maybe even curiosity, but something else was beneath it. That glint of tension she'd only seen when he slipped into one of his moods, the kind he wrote poems about but never shared. She looked back at Brennan, who had just stepped closer to the edge of their platform. Cale joined him, already shifting a shoulder as if testing for a transformation. Celine didn't miss how his left hand flexed, almost flickering at the edges like it had trouble remembering what shape it was supposed to be. Tamsin said nothing, but her eyes tracked the seams in the wall, and her fingers hovered near the clasp on her watch, a control node she had been tweaking in secret. They were all adapting, trying to stay calm. Celine closed her eyes for a second, letting herself absorb the moment. Her pulse steadied with effort. Then she exhaled, focused again, and muttered loud enough for Rowan to hear. "You've been watching for a while." He blinked once, then turned his head toward her, expression unreadable. "I wanted to see what we'd wake up to," he said softly. "And?" she asked, glancing down at her phone again. Rowan shrugged. "Nothing good." A subtle tone chimed, soft and synthetic, followed by a shimmer of light at the far wall. It wasn't sound so much as a resonance. It vibrated faintly in Celine's chest and against the backs of her teeth. A rectangular frame flared into existence on the curved surface ahead, light spilling outward in crisp, angled lines. The screen resolved into clarity like glass clearing of frost. A woman's face filled the space, serene and sharp. Mid-50s, silver hair in a precise bob, pale eyes with no warmth. Her suit was dark gray, collar high, shoulders squared, the emblem of Argus stitched onto the left breast like a badge of finality. Celine recognized her immediately. "Dr. Miriam Halberd," she whispered. Halberd didn't smile. She didn't even blink at first. "Good morning," the voice came, clinical and unhurried. "Welcome to Facility 12, Subdivision Hollow." Cale made a soft growl. Tamsin folded her arms. "I trust you're physically stable. That is a positive outcome. You are currently under 24-hour observation while we calibrate for containment integrity and metabolic fluctuations. Your data is being logged for analysis." Brennan took a step forward, chin raised. "Where are we? What did you do to us?" Halberd's eyes flicked to him, as if she were reviewing a data point rather than addressing a person. "You are currently classified as anomalous biofield assets resulting from an uncontained field inversion cascade," she said. "Containment was necessary. You were not supposed to remain at your altered scale. The fact that you have done so is of interest." "Altered scale?" Tamsin echoed. "You shrank us." "We initiated a controlled demonstration," Halberd said. "The failsafe did not engage. Currently, your condition is considered irreversible with current protocols." Silence held the group for several seconds. Celine felt her stomach twist. Her hands clenched at her sides, then relaxed with effort. She opened her mouth, but Rowan beat her to it. "You said assets." Halberd paused. "Correct. Not students. Not subjects. Assets. That is your current designation. You are no longer considered candidates for integration into traditional field units. You will remain here for specialized study and strategic development until further notice." Cale took a step forward, fists curling. "So we're property now?" "You are highly valuable," Halberd replied, her voice even, unbothered. "And potentially unstable. Your containment here is both a safety precaution and a research opportunity." "Convenient," Tamsin said under her breath. Celine's breath came shallower, but she forced control. "You've told our families?" "They have been informed that you are alive and assigned to a secure national program," Halberd said. "No additional contact will be permitted at this time." "No contact?" Brennan asked, voice low. "There is a broader national interest at stake. You are now classified under Tier 7 containment. All actions involving your presence, condition, or development fall under black-level clearance." The light dimmed slightly. Halberd's eyes scanned the group one last time. "Further orientation will be delivered shortly. Remain calm. Cooperate, and your transition will be more manageable." The screen faded to black. Rowan sat perched on the corner of a low platform that passed for a communal table. The space around them, curved, cold, and humming with faint static, didn't look like a prison. That was the most insidious part. It looked like an exhibit. The others moved in slow orbit around each other, like electrons might drift in a suspended field, unanchored but aware of every other presence. No one spoke at first. The air carried a lingering sterility, both in smell and in spirit. Tamsin was the one who finally broke it. "So," she said, arms folded, jaw clenched, "that's it. We're not students. We're not people. We're assets." "Containment assets," Celine added softly, her voice clipped at the edges. Brennan stood near the main screen, arms crossed, the muscles in his jaw working. "They're serious. They've already informed our families, or told them something that closes the book." Cale paced along the curved perimeter wall, bare feet silent on the surface. "That doesn't mean they get away with it." Really? Rowan asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. Because right now, I don't see anyone coming to stop them. That drew a glance from Celine. She didn't say anything. But Rowan felt the weight of her attention settle on him, waiting. They can't just make us disappear, Tamsin snapped, then corrected herself. Not all of us. And why not? Cale asked. We're 8 inches tall and stuck in a box under a mountain. Because I'm a citizen of the UK, Tamsin said. And a daughter of House Brecker, a sitting member of the British peerage. My family has enough pull to cause diplomatic fallout. Celine too, Rowan said quietly. Albright. Dual citizenship, US and Finland. Her father sits on a UN subpanel for energy policy. If she goes missing, someone notices. He gestured toward Brennan. Brennan Thorne, 16 years old, son of Patrick and Mallory Thorne, Boston, Massachusetts. Family name is carved into 2 buildings at Harvard and at least 3 DARPA Black sites. They have reach. Rowan's gaze shifted to Cale. Cale O'Cotterson, 16. Born in South Dakota, raised mostly off-grid, but his grandfather is a retired 4-star general. The name's on record. Cale blinked. How do you know that? I read everything, Rowan said. It's what I do. Silence stretched out again, but this time it crackled with thought, not paralysis. Tamsin narrowed her eyes. And what about you? Rowan looked at her. Then at the others. There's no inquiry for me. Celine's brows drew down. That's not fair. It's accurate, Rowan said. No titles. No trust funds. No embassies. Just one old man in eastern Kentucky who probably thinks I'm on a field trip. Brennan finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. That doesn't mean you're less important. Rowan shrugged. To Argus it does. He stood, moving to where the ambient lights traced soft gradients across the wall. But even if they wanted to vanish us, they won't get away with it. Not cleanly. Not long term. Maybe for a few weeks, a few months. But someone starts asking questions. Someone always does. Celine looked toward the main screen. That's what Halbert is afraid of. That's why we're here, not somewhere off-grid. This facility is meant to be observed. It's public-facing enough to be deniable. Cale rubbed his shoulder and muttered. So what do we do? Sit and wait to be studied. No, Rowan said. We get smarter. We find out what they're afraid of. Because if they went to this much trouble to make us vanish, they're afraid of something. He turned back toward them. And that's our leverage. Rowan blinked against the light. It was softer now, golden and warm, not the cold fluorescence of the lab. The air carried a trace of something natural. Loam, grass, the faint pollen of some unfamiliar flower. And for a moment, it almost fooled him into thinking he'd woken up somewhere safe. But then he sat up. The scale was wrong. Again, they were outdoors, or something meant to mimic it. The sky overhead shimmered like a high-definition, blue and bright dome, with drifting artificial clouds that moved just a little too smoothly. The trees nearby rustled in a breeze that didn't touch his skin. And the blades of grass reached to his knees. Not wild growth. Miniature turf, engineered down to mimic nature and perfectly trimmed by something unseen. He looked to his right and spotted a massive bloom, gazania. If he remembered correctly, its petals upright like a sentinel, nearly shoulder height. To someone full-sized, this would be a well-tended garden. To them, it was a scaled simulation of Eden. He heard soft movement behind him. Brennan stirred, then sat up. Cale groaned and flopped onto his back with a mutter. Tamsin snapped to full alert the moment she moved, already scanning the perimeter. Celine sat up more slowly. Her expression was unreadable, caught somewhere between awe and suspicion. Rowan stood. They were on a grassy rise overlooking what could only be called a campus, 5 small buildings arranged in a U-shape around a courtyard. Every one of them was shrunken, proportioned to their size. There were stairs, walkways, even a fountain scaled to a babbling brook. There was even a scaled-down Olympic-sized swimming pool. The ground seemed covered in grass or moss, or something resembling turf they could easily walk on. Beyond that, a barrier rose like a wall of pale green forest, dwarf trees, and dense brush forming a soft boundary too tall to climb. He scanned the windows. Cameras. Discreet but not hidden. Movement inside the windows of one building, probably surveillance. He stepped forward and placed a hand on a nearby stone column that supported the faux overlook. Warm to the touch. Real stone shrunk. Everything here was real, but nothing was natural. Behind him, Tamsin said flatly, "This is a terrarium." Brennan shook his head. "It's a prison pretending to be a retreat. Too perfect, Celine said, staring through the windows of one of the bungalows. "And all of our stuff is here. This isn't new. They planned for this." Rowan turned and looked toward the nearest house. The windows were open. Inside, he could see his books, his bed, his backpack. He spoke quietly, more to himself than to the others. "They moved us while we were out." Cale looked at him. "So what now, genius?" Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Now we find the cracks in the glass." Rowan trailed behind the others, his hands tucked into the pockets of his fitted hoodie. The breeze that rustled the giant grass and flower stalks carried with it a sterile scent, clean but not fresh, filtered through systems designed to mimic the natural without ever touching it. The grass bent and swayed around them, taller than his waist, their green blades parting like a corridor as the group stepped into the open. Celine and Brennan walked hand in hand ahead of him. Their fingers laced like it was second nature now. Cale and Tamsin mirrored them a few paces to the side, Cale leaning down slightly whenever she spoke, like her words were worth protecting. Rowan kept his distance, feet dragging through the soft loam-like turf that felt more like playground rubber than actual earth. He didn't belong in that symmetry. He knew it. More importantly, they knew it too. The stream curved before them, tracing its way through the heart of the miniature campus. Bridges arched overhead. Tiny walkways, too precise to be natural, led from the 5 scaled buildings toward shared gardens, a pool, and the central plaza. Every detail had been manufactured. Their possessions had been curated. Their lives were now a carefully constructed illusion. Brennan stopped and pointed. "That tree," he said. It wasn't tall by any real-world standard, barely 10 feet, but it loomed like an ancient redwood at their current height. A dwarf pear, maybe. One of its white blossoms fluttered down past them like confetti. Tamsin pressed her fingers against a laminated info panel set at their scale. "There's metadata in the soil. Sensors are everywhere. Argus is watching everything, even soil chemistry." Celine turned slowly. "Then they'll see this too." She reached toward the tree, then stumbled. Rowan's eyes snapped forward. Celine's body flickered, just for a second, like an image misaligned between frames. Her skin shimmered with a faint blue glow, and the air around her sizzled with a sudden crackle of static. Brennan grabbed her arm. "Celine." A wave of light rippled outward from her form. It passed through Brennan, then into Cale and Tamsin, and finally Rowan. Every hair on Rowan's arm stood up. He gasped. The world tilted, just slightly. A rushing roar like a waterfall filled his ears. His vision blurred, and then focused sharper than he thought possible. Every blade of grass, every microfracture in the stones nearby, every mote of dust suspended in the false breeze became suddenly, painfully visible. Cale let out a sharp bark of surprise. What the hell was that? Brennan staggered backward, eyes wide. Power spike. That wasn't just her. Behind the tree, a shimmer of refracted air betrayed the movement of Argus observers behind the terrarium glass. Rowan turned slowly, and then the ground near the stream cracked. Just slightly. But it shouldn't have. Tamsin cursed. "I felt that. We're." Rowan finished the sentence for her. Changing. Beyond the dome, the silhouettes of larger figures began to shift. Alarms, silent but visible, pulsed red inside the observer towers. Data streaked across transparent displays as Argus techs scrambled to adjust readings. "Guess they're learning something new," Cale said. Rowan stared down at his hands. The static buzz was still there. Beneath his skin, something waited. Something ancient, wild, and just now waking up. Dr. Miriam Halberd stood with her arms folded, gaze locked on the central observation screen. 5 tiny figures stood within the containment dome, their outlines flickering with post-biofield interference. Her lips tightened as Celine Albright's latest output spiked off the chart, casting a temporary distortion across the surrounding micronized trees and walkways. Behind her, technicians scrambled. Graphs bled upward on their displays. The atmospheric regulators stuttered and recalibrated. A containment AI pinged softly, signaling another anomalous pulse. "I want diagnostics on every cell node in the hollow," she said crisply. "Already running," one of the analysts said. "There's a cascade effect, but it's decentralized. We're trying to isolate the primary trigger." "It's not a trigger," she muttered, more to herself. "It's emergence." She turned away from the window and moved to the communications desk, where her assistant sat, headset active. The list of outgoing contact reports still glowed on the screen. 5 families. 5 carefully worded conversations. 5 different security-level briefings. "And the last one?" she asked. We've spoken to Senator Thorne's office, Ambassador Albright, the Brecker liaison, and the Cotterson Foundation, her assistant said. We're still managing follow-up from 2 of them. No major resistance. Halbert's hand hovered above the 5th entry. Rowan Pike, Guardian, Colton Pike. The name blinked like an unanswered question. And the grandfather? The assistant winced. Difficult. He refused the secure video call. Insisted on landline only. We followed standard diversion protocols, but he asked questions about biometric logs. Knew enough to recognize when we were deflecting. He used to work black box communications out of Wright-Patt during the 90s. Halbert's jaw ticked. He's suspicious. Not just grieving. That could complicate things. The screen behind her flared again. Celine's readings were no longer static. They were climbing steadily. Rowan's were doing the same, but in a different pattern. Rhythmic pulses, almost psionic, layered over biofield harmonic fluctuations. Halbert stared into the display for a long moment. They were supposed to be bright. Controlled. A proof of concept. Not this. No one responded. The screen continued to pulse. Halbert narrowed her eyes. Start contingency prep. If emergence continues, I want medical, psionic, and metaphysical on standby. Lock Tier 8 override into the hollow. And someone, she added, glancing back at the communications desk, get me a clean line to Colton Pike. I'll speak to him myself. She turned back to the viewport, where the miniature figures now moved slowly through their artificial paradise. Because this time, she said quietly, I'm not certain who's really in control. Tamsin's boots whispered over the short grass as she walked beside Cale, their fingers loosely entwined, anchoring her, giving her something to hold on to. The air was almost sweet, over-engineered floral tones layered under the scent of new plastic and warm synthetic soil. She tried not to breathe too deeply. They passed the stream's edge, where a footbridge arched over the water, and stepped into the courtyard between the 5 bungalow-like dwellings. Brennan and Celine walked just ahead of them, murmuring quietly. Rowan trailed behind, hands in his pockets, distant. She tried not to watch him too closely, but noticed how his eyes scanned everything like a chessboard. He wasn't being quiet because he was confused. He was silent because he saw more than he wanted to admit. I think it's time, Brennan said suddenly. Cale looked up. Time for what? Brennan turned, held out his hands as if testing the breeze, and then, without warning, his feet lifted from the ground. He rose 3 feet into the air, hovering like he was standing on an invisible lift. His eyes widened. I didn't, he started. You're flying, Celine said with a laugh. Brennan, you're actually... A ripple of light exploded from her as her body surged with electric brilliance. She flared into a silhouette of living energy, her form incandescent, sparks flickering around her like fireflies. Her hair streamed upward, no longer blonde but a cascade of blue-white lightning. Cale laughed sharply. All right, my turn. He released Tamsin's hand and took a deep breath. His skin rippled, and in seconds he was taller, broader, and his limbs elongated into something both humanoid and feline. Copper and black fur striped down his muscular arms. Massive wings sprouted from his back, feathered and powerful, a raptor's span. Wildside, he muttered. That's going to stick. Tamsin closed her eyes and let go. The transformation rippled through her like hot metal pouring into a mold. Her skin hardened, shining, as her body reformed into a sculpted frame of metallic copper. She opened her eyes, vision sharper, depth perception refined. Every gear of every camera embedded in the wall hummed in her ears. I can feel the systems, she said aloud. Everything in this habitat is networked. I can see the signals. I can hear them talking. Celine drifted toward her, still glowing, her voice radiant. You're interfacing with the environment. Something like that, Tamsin replied, eyes flashing gold. Rowan stood apart, watching. They all turned to him at once. He looked down at his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up and slowly extended a hand. His voice was soft, almost wistful. I can see the connections now, he said. All the pieces. Everything threads together. A stick, no larger than a pencil, shot through the air from 20 feet away and landed perfectly in his outstretched hand. He examined it, twirled it once between his fingers, and then said in a quiet voice. Better than he was before, better, stronger, faster. Cale barked a laugh. No way. 70s television, Celine whispered, smiling. Rowan simply nodded and tucked the stick behind his ear like a stylus. Tamsin didn't say anything more, but her internal processors were already calculating power curves, EM field fluctuations, and metabolic acceleration rates. Whatever was happening to them, it wasn't random. It was beginning. Kale sat at the edge of a low stone planter near the stream, wings folded loosely behind him, the scent of mineral-rich water and distant synthetic wildflowers drifting through the hollow air. Tamsin was beside him again, her hand curled lightly around his. She'd already shed her copper form for the moment, her skin still glowing faintly with residual energy. Her warmth grounded him. He'd always been grounded by something. His work. The earth. The pulse of something living. But this new world was different. Not just in scale. In rhythm. In the quiet between moments. He looked toward the others, now scattered across the courtyard. Brennan was floating just above the grass again, clearly trying to understand how he was doing it. Celine glowed like a low-burning star, orbiting his presence, always close, always confident. Rowan lingered farther off, pretending to inspect one of the slender trees that dominated their view. But he hadn't said a word since catching that stick. Kale frowned. They were 5, but not equal. It wasn't intelligence. Rowan was as brilliant, hell, probably smarter, than any of them. But he didn't carry it the same way. The rest of them had always fit into the architecture of privilege and design. Brennan Thorne with his lineage and legacy. Celine Albright is perfectly poised between diplomacy and brilliance. Tamsin Brecker is a walking embodiment of nobility, confidence, and bite. Kale wasn't royalty, but he came with pedigree. The Cotcherson name meant something to people in dark suits and deeper files. He'd learned to move through halls of power like a ghost, never quite belonging, but never excluded. Rowan didn't have that shield. At Apex Academy, they'd all started young, kids pulled into something bigger than any of them could have imagined. A place not just for the gifted, but for the exceptional. DARPA-backed, deep-funded, covert-adjacent. They'd spent 4 years learning to outthink, outrun, and outperform every benchmark set before them. Apex wasn't a school. It was a crucible. They'd had classes in things no normal school would ever touch. Quantum code parsing, parallel heuristics, and biomechanical neurotheory. They built machines that could change color based on thought, drones that could map emotions, and simulations that ran futures like dreamscapes. And Rowan? Rowan absorbed it all. Never flashy. Never in the spotlight. But he knew things. Deep things. Weird things. Kale remembered watching Rowan once during a simulation, just a dreamspace walkthrough of a hypothetical time loop. While the rest of them had charged through the exercise, Rowan had paused. Looked at a single flower. Then he'd asked the instructors if the simulation accounted for seasonal variation in high-altitude pollen flow, because the species wasn't native to the terrain. He'd broken the simulation with a question. They'd had to reset it. The memory made Kale smile. But Rowan was always apart. During mealtimes. Study groups. Outings. Not by exile, just not included. Not intentionally. Not cruelly. But invisibly. Kale squeezed Tamsin's hand. Their own connection had surprised him. It wasn't just chemistry, it was fire and gravity. Tamsin had her sharp wit and harder shell, and Kale was all quiet wilderness and slow, anchored strength. When they'd finally stopped orbiting each other and collided, it had been everything, urgent, real grounding. He glanced at Brennan and Celine, sharing some private exchange near the stairs of one bungalow. That had been inevitable. 2 powerhouses, finding not just a challenge but respect in each other. But Rowan? Rowan had no anchor. Kale's gaze drifted back toward him. Rowan was still standing at the edge of the tree line, one hand resting against the bark, eyes distant. What happened to someone who had no one left? What happened when the world shrank and you were still alone? Kale didn't know, but he planned to find out. The secure line crackled faintly before the voice came through. Rough, deliberate, and laced with the steady confidence of someone used to wiring things that couldn't be seen. "Dr. Halberd," said Colton Pike. "Appreciate the return call. Can't say I've been impressed with your office's communications so far." She stood at the edge of the surveillance pit, a hand wrapped around her mug of coffee. Steam curled up into the fluorescent chill of the operations deck, mingling with the low hum of machines. "We've had an unexpected situation to manage, Mr. Pike. Rowan is being monitored." "He is well." "That's so. Because I've got a silent phone, no video feed, no assurance beyond your word. And I've worked enough government contracts to know what silence usually means." Halberd's eyes remained on the transparent dome far below. Within the sealed chamber, the 5 figures moved around the hollow campus, each under a dozen lines of active sensor feeds. "Rowan's condition is uncommon. The entire group is undergoing extended observation due to a biofield inconsistency. Uncommon. Right. Sounds like you cooked up something bigger than you meant to. You shrink them. That's classified. Not exactly a denial. Halberd said nothing. The silence stretched long. Then Pike added, his voice cooling. You ever hear of a program out of Volgograd in the 80s? Something with the name Kashii? That made her flinch. Just slightly. Rumors, she said. Rumors that folks who got shrunk stayed that way. And started doing things they couldn't before. Things nobody could explain. Rumors circulated that the US government had liberated the scientists behind it and started its own program. You're telling me my grandson isn't involved in something like that? We're observing new variables. But we are in control. Are you? Click. The line went dead. Halberd stood still for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and said, seal the dome. Triple reinforce the inner curvature with transparent aluminum, layered full 7-tier matrix. Understood. Activate total spectrum monitoring. Biofield harmonics, psionic drift, EM resonance. I want their breath rates logged in microsecond resolution. Suspend privacy protocols, no gaps, no soft zones. Every inch of that terrarium is to be covered. Technicians moved quickly around her, their fingers flying over interfaces. The air filled with the overlapping sounds of relays clicking, displays updating, and magnetic locks settling into place with heavy finality. Halberd crossed back to the main viewport, watching the figures below. Her eyes narrowed. They're not just gifted anymore. They're evolving. And I want every atom of that process documented. She looked down at the data feeds, which were spiking, pulsing, and looping in patterns she'd only ever seen theorized. The Americans would not be caught flat-footed if this were anything like Kashii. Not on her watch. The screen dimmed. Halberd stood in the silence for several long seconds before turning to her staff. Seal the dome. I want every structural joint reinforced. Transparent aluminum layers, all 7 tiers. Yes, Director. Activate full-spectrum surveillance. Thermal, quantum, psionic. If it vibrates, I want a signature. If it breathes, I want rhythm charts. Privacy protocols are suspended. Nothing is off-limits. The hum of machines surged around her, like a rising tide. The containment dome, now sealed and pulsing with faint blue light, hung overhead like a god's glass eye. We'll learn what makes them tick, she said quietly. And if they're the beginning of something more, or something uncontrollable, we will find out first. Behind her, monitors lit up with charts, images, and thermal outlines. The 5 figures inside the hollow moved through the simulation, unaware of how many lenses now watched every breath they took. Halberd watched them and didn't blink. The dining table was a wide oval cut from a single sheet of synthetic oak, polished until it reflected the soft ambient lights embedded overhead. It sat beneath a luminous skylight projecting a false evening sky with static stars that never shifted. The 5 gathered with trays of neatly portioned food, each item a near-perfect miniature, micronized to match their scale. Cale watched as Rowan drifted off toward one of the small counters along the wall, his tray cradled in one arm. Typical. Hey, Pike, Brennan called, casually but not unkind. Sit with us. Rowan blinked, his expression unreadable. For a second, he looked to Cale, then to Celine. We're all in this together, Brennan added. The silence that followed was brief, but pregnant with surprise. Tamsin raised an eyebrow. Even Cale turned slightly, taken aback. Celine only gave a small, knowing smile, as if she'd expected it all along. Rowan approached and sat without a word. He kept his eyes on his food, but he didn't leave. The food was strange. Scaled-down roast chicken, tiny vegetables, single kernels of corn, and bread no larger than a cracker. The proportions were off in subtle ways. There was too much meat in the slice of chicken compared to fat, too little juice in the tomato. Cale noticed Rowan eyeing a sliced cucumber suspiciously. They had to micronize all this, Celine said, her voice even. If they just shrank regular portions, the food would separate. You'd get gelatinous fat globs and dry protein flakes. Not to mention the imbalance of sugars to acids, Tamsin chimed in. Juice from fruit would turn syrupy or chemically bitter. Rowan finally spoke. You can't solve world hunger by shrinking people. Ratios don't scale. It's a mechanical as well as a chemical structure problem. His voice was flat, clinical, but it was something. You been thinking about that all day? Brennan asked, tone half-teasing. No, Rowan replied. Been thinking about what's next. And why no one said the word prison yet. The table fell silent. They finished the meal in measured bites, not rushing, but not lingering either. Conversation moved on to the day's surprises, the powers, the reactions, and the sudden shift in reality. Cale said little, content to listen and absorb. Tamsin sat a little closer than usual, occasionally bumping his shoulder with her own. Afterward, they migrated to the entertainment room. It was a lounge-style chamber with two large, plush sofas built to their scale and a massive screen mounted to the far wall. They were all surprised by the digital library. Thousands of titles, games, VR sims, and archived media. They settled on a movie, something light, classic sci-fi. Cale sat with Tamsin curled against him. Celine took Brennan's hand and pulled him beside her. Rowan lingered at the edge of the room, then quietly stood and left. Cale frowned. 20 minutes later, Cale slipped out of the movie room. He found Rowan in the library, cross-legged on the floor beside a shelf of books scaled precisely to their current size. He was flipping through a thick, yellowing volume on theoretical resonance fields. "You okay?" Cale asked. Rowan didn't look up. "Define okay." Cale stepped inside and closed the door. The silence was heavier here. "You just vanished." "I'm used to it." Rowan turned a page. "Figured you'd be used to it by now, too." Cale exhaled. "Rowan, don't." "It's fine," Rowan interrupted. "I've always been the extra wheel. Apex was a team of 4 with a ghost 5th. I knew that going in." Cale crouched across from him. "You're not a ghost. You're just quiet." Rowan smiled faintly. "No, Cale. I'm the sidekick that gets killed off halfway through the season to give the main characters emotional growth." Cale winced. "That's not fair." "Maybe not. But it's true." He closed the book and looked up at Cale, eyes glassy but dry. "You ever think about what happens to me, Cale? Like long-term?" Cale swallowed. "What do you mean?" Rowan raised his eyebrows. "I'm 16. I'm stuck at 8 inches tall. No partner. No one even looks at me that way. What happens in 5 years? 10. I'm just here. A teenage in cell until I'm not a teen anymore. Then I'm just the tragic figure in a lab. At best, I'm a cautionary tale. At worst, a footnote." Cale said nothing. Rowan stood slowly. "I'm not asking for pity. Just, don't pretend this is easy." Cale rose too, his throat tight. "It's not. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Rowan said. "Just don't forget I'm here." Cale nodded slowly. They walked back in silence, shoulder to shoulder, both unsure if either had said what needed to be said. Later that night, as the others filed toward the dormitory pods, Brennan stepped back and caught Cale by the elbow. "Where'd you go earlier?" "During the movie." Cale glanced at him, then back toward the corridor. "Library." Rowan was there. Brennan narrowed his eyes. "You worried about him?" Cale hesitated. "Yeah. Not because he's going to do anything, but he's isolated. Back at Apex, we were surrounded by other people. Time gave hope. He didn't have a partner, but maybe that would have changed. Now it won't. There are only 5 of us. 4 are paired off. That's math, not malice." Brennan looked uncomfortable. "Don't tell me you want Celine or Tamsin to throw him a bone or something." "That's—" Cale turned sharply. "Don't insult them. Or Rowan. This isn't about sex. It's about being seen. He's the 5th gear in a 4-speed transmission. And if you're going to be the leader you keep posturing as, then maybe it's time you got your head out of your ass and did something about the guy on your team that's fading into the walls." Brennan didn't reply. Cale walked away. Each of their rooms was dark, temperature-controlled, and eerily silent except for the faint hum of climate regulation and biosignal monitoring. Brennan stirred in his bed, something cold and wrong prickling at his spine. A low vibration trembled through the floor. Then another pulse. He threw off his covers and padded barefoot into the hallway. Cale emerged from his room at the same time, blinking. "You feel that?" Brennan asked. Cale nodded. "It's coming from Rowan's room." By the time they reached the door, Celine and Tamsin were already there. Tamsin reached for the handle, then pulled back as static leapt to her fingers. His whole room's energized. Cale pushed the door open. Inside, Rowan hovered 2 feet above his bed. His body radiated golden-white light, arcane-looking patterns spiraling around his limbs and into the air above him. Complex glyphs formed, shimmered, and dissolved again, each comprising an intricate circuit of thought and meaning. "What the hell?" Brennan whispered. Tamsin took a step in, eyes wide. "He's not just dreaming. He's syncing. His subconscious is interfacing with the entire system. This isn't hacking, this is rewriting." The lights throughout the entire hallway dimmed. A low pulse echoed across the facility. They heard a snap and brief spark somewhere distant, Argus systems faltering under the strain. Rowan's fingers flexed midair. A gust of hot wind pushed outward, then vanished. The walls rippled like heat waves. Then a soundless flash. Each of them now wore a black and gold bodysuit of unknown origin. The texture shimmered, adaptive yet soft, snug like woven silk and mesh. They looked at each other, stunned. Rowan's body lowered gently to the bed. His shorts and t-shirt replaced with a similar bodysuit. The glyphs faded. The room went still. Cale looked over to Brennan. You really want to alienate that kind of power in a friend? Miriam Halberd jerked awake, the monitors in front of her bathing her face in emergency red. She'd fallen asleep in the observation chair, a mug still warm in her hand. A single technician was shouting from the side terminal. Spike from subject Pike. Full psychic resonance. Then full systems feedback across all interior networks. What kind of feedback? She said sharply, straightening. The technician looked at her, pale. External too. He hit the sensors, the dome harmonics, and director, he restructured containment frequencies. He rewrote them. While asleep. She blinked. He what? Every AI node logged a pattern shift. Same glyphs, different bandwidths. Halberd stood slowly. I want every reading. No filter. No smoothing. Show me raw data. And prep a clean room analysis. He changed something in our systems, and we need to know what it was. All 5 subjects slept outside the glass, in the glowing darkness of the hollow. She stared at Rowan Pike, unmoving now. Kashiai all over again, she muttered. Tamsin hadn't slept. Not really. She had returned to her room and sat cross-legged in bed with her fingers flying across the sleek screen of her tablet. Her eyes, dark with thought, flicked from line to line of code, traceroute logs, and internal Argus architecture. The surge Rowan triggered had burned through a dozen security partitions. And in the chaos, something inside her clicked. A backdoor built for system diagnostics had been temporarily unguarded. Now it was hers. She was deep into the system's metadata before dawn when she found it. Panopticon Division 5. It wasn't just surveillance, it was total. Behavioral mapping. Heart rate variances. A database comparing their facial microexpressions against a psychological prediction model. Even their bathrooms had layered sensors. The violation stung in her gut. Then she saw it. A buried file. Translation incomplete. Origin, USSR. Late Cold War. Mid-80s. Project Kashiai. Her breath caught. She scanned. Psionic resonance. Micronized field operatives. Biofield drift resulting in paranormal manifestation. A small cadre allegedly defected to the UK into something called P-Branch. The next morning, she gathered the others in the common room. We're not anomalies, she said. We're assets. They looked at her. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but listening. After last night, Argus upgraded our classification. We're now under the Panopticon section. That's Argus's internal surveillance and threat analysis division. The full name of the parent group is Applied Reduction and Genetic Utility Systems. They told us that Argus stood for Advanced Research Group for United Scholars, Brennan protested. They lied, Rowan replied flatly. She flicked her fingers and sent a projection from her tablet onto the wall, rows of glowing red files. Brennan leaned in to see. Cale frowned. They know everything. They're watching everything. Every room, every breath. Even the latrines. Cale scowled. Seriously? Celine just nodded. I'm not surprised. Tamsin hesitated, glancing at Rowan. Something about him still triggered that reaction in her. The Appalachian accent, the odd music preferences, and the way he didn't belong. But she also remembered the light in his room, and how it had changed everything. I found mention of a Russian project. Same micronization tech. But the subjects developed powers. Psionics. They were called Project Kashiai. Most of them defected to Britain. Joined P-Branch. That was over 40 years ago. Why hide it? Rowan asked quietly. Because they're scared of us, Tamsin said. And scared people do surveillance. Control. Containment. Brennan stood. What does that mean for us? Tamsin's expression darkened. She tapped a final command. The files folded back into her tablet. It means this place isn't a sanctuary. It's a lab. It's a prison. She looked around at the others. Welcome to the Hollow.